Hi, I'm Bob Cringely, and I'm here to tell you the incredible story of how personal computers took over the world. Why am I telling you this at a basketball game? Well, I like the game, but mainly it's because of that guy down there.
His name is Paul Allen, and everything you see here belongs to him. The Portland Trail Blazers basketball team, their arena, even the dancers. Thanks to personal computers, he has $8 billion to spend on such toys. 20 years ago, Allen and his high school friend Bill Gates were running a two-man software company called Microsoft. Today, Allen is richer than God, and Gates is richer than Allen.
20 years ago, young men like Paul Allen and Bill Gates invented the personal computer, and in doing so launched a revolution that's changed the way we live, work, and communicate. It's hard to believe that 20 years ago there were no personal computers. Now it's the third largest industry in the world, somewhere between energy production and illegal drugs. But the most amazing thing of all is that it happened by accident, because a bunch of disenfranchised nerds wanted to impress their friends. Time for the Cringely Crash Course in Basic Computers, Part 1. This is a mainframe computer. All of these cabinets are one machine. In the old days, all computers were this size. They were tended by engineers in white coats, a kind of priesthood who took their jobs very seriously. Now, all computers work pretty much the same, whether it's a giant that serves 2,000 users like this one, or a little notebook that serves only me. They process numerical data, adding, multiplying, comparing. Fact is, if you can quantify it, a computer can handle it. It's the emotional stuff they don't know what to do with.
The data must be put into a special binary code consisting only of ones and zeros. And you have to give the computer instructions, also in code, to tell it exactly what to do with the data and in what order. These instructions are called a program. In the early days, you put in the instructions by flipping switches or loaded them from paper tape. This was called machine language. It made computers a pain to use. Even worse, every type of computer spoke a different machine language.
While the ENIAC could compute the 30-second trajectory of a shell in 20 seconds, operators required 2 days to program it to do so.
Then a U.S. Navy captain named Grace Hopper solved the problem. She invented a computer language, English words that the computer itself could translate into binary code. Now users could type whole lists of instructions into a computer rather than flipping those damn switches. Like most things having to do with computers, that first language had a silly name, COBOL. It was followed by other languages like Fortran and BASIC, and they all made computing just a bit more user-friendly. So when some nerd tells you he's been up all night programming or writing software or hacking code, what he really means is he's been typing long lists of instructions into his computer.
Mainframe computers were far from personal. They sat in big air-conditioned rooms at insurance companies, phone companies, and the bank, and their main function was to get us confused with some other guy named Cringely, who was a deadbeat and had a criminal record. Eventually, computer terminals did begin to appear in some schools, but most of us paid no attention. But there was usually one kid who did pay attention, falling in love with the digital purity of those ones and zeros. He was the nerd.
And I took this book home that described the PDP-8 computer, and it was just like a Bible to me. I mean, all these things that for some reason I'd fallen in love with, like you might fall in love with a card game called Magic, or you might fall in love with doing crossword puzzles or something else, or playing a musical instrument. I fell in love with these little descriptions of computers on their inside, and it was a little mathematics. I could work out some problems on paper and solve it and see how it's done, and I could come up with my own solutions and feel good inside.
So you would keyboard these commands in, and then you would wait for a while, and then the thing would go and it would tell you something out. But even with that, it was still remarkable, especially for a 10-year-old, that you could write a program in BASIC, let's say, or Fortran, and actually this machine would sort of take your idea and it would sort of execute your idea and give you back some results. And if they were the results that you predicted, your program really worked. It was an incredibly thrilling experience.
Nerds wanted their own computers right from the beginning, but it took a technological breakthrough to make that possible.
This is it, the chip, the microprocessor. This is what allows you to have a mainframe computer on your desk. In the 1950s, mainframes were as big as this garage, and that's because they were filled with thousands of these vacuum tubes or valves. Eventually, the valves were made much smaller and replaced with transistors. Still too big, however, to make a computer that could fit on your desk. What that took was further miniaturization. Here we have a single piece of silicon etched with thousands of transistors. This microprocessor holds more than 1 million transistors, and that's the secret of the personal computer. And that's why they call it Silicon Valley, not Computer Valley.
These are the people who invented the microprocessor, Intel. Intel was started 28 years ago by a handful of guys after a row with their old boss. Their microprocessors today power 85% of the world's computers. Intel not only invented the chip, they are responsible for the laid-back Silicon Valley working style. Everyone was on a first-name basis. There were no reserved parking places, no offices, only cubicles. It's still true today. Here's the chairman's cubicle.
Knock, knock. Yeah, I knocked on the door, but there's no door.
Gordon Moore is one of the Intel founders, worth $3 billion. With money like that, I'd have a door.
In a business like this, the people with the power are the ones that have the understanding of what's going on, not necessarily the ones on top. It's very important that those people that have the knowledge are the ones that make the decisions. So we set up something where everyone who had the knowledge had an equal say in what was going on.
Intel's microprocessors kept getting more powerful. They soon had enough horsepower to run a whole computer. Only Intel didn't appreciate the brilliance of their own product, seeing it as useful mainly for calculators or traffic lights. Intel had all the elements necessary to invent the PC business, but they just didn't get it. Lucky for us, someone did. This is the chip that launched the personal computer revolution. This is the magazine that announced it. In January 1975, featured on the cover was the world's first personal computer, the Altair 8800. It was the crazy idea of an ex-Air Force officer from Georgia, Ed Roberts.
If you look at it, it was kind of a grandiose, almost megalomaniac kind of scheme, And right now I couldn't do it because I could see right off there's no way you could do this. There isn't any way you could do this. But at that time, we just lacked the benefits of age and experience. We didn't know we couldn't do it.
20 years after Ed Roberts' flash of brilliance, this exhibit is being held to celebrate the anniversary of the Altair. Like every other PC pioneer, Ed built his computer just because he wanted one to play with.
There were some of us that lusted after computers, really, at that time. All the computers in the world tended to be in big centers, and you had to get permission to get close to them, and it was, nobody had access to computers then. And the idea that you could have your own computer and do whatever you wanted to with it, whenever you wanted to, was fantastic.
This is an Altair computer, the first personal computer. And not just any Altair. This is Altair serial number 2, the second one made. The first Altair made was sent off to be photographed at a magazine and was lost in the mail. So this is the oldest personal computer in the world. Pretty historic junk, but the question is, what do you do with it? I mean, it has a front panel with switches that you can click back and forth and some lights, but in the back, there's no place to connect a keyboard, there's no place to connect a monitor, there's no place to connect a printer. In fact, there's practically nothing at all that you can really do with this thing. But back then, 1975, the people who had it were thrilled.
The nerds formed clubs to talk about their new toy. One of the first was the Homebrew Computer Club, which met on Wednesday evenings in a hall rented from Stanford University in Silicon Valley. Presiding over near anarchy was Lee Felsenstein, who pretended to be in charge.
We saw ourselves as crazed, ignored geniuses, or possibly geniuses, but at least we could each hope to get our hands on a computer of our own.
The very uselessness of the Altair is what drove the hobbyists together. Roger Mellon and Harry Garland started an early computer company. They came here to meet others and to figure out just what the heck could be done with this new toy. A solution in search of a problem.
There's no keyboard that I can see.
The Altair was tedious to use. At first, the only way that data and instructions could be given to the computer was by flipping switches. Take something trivial like 2 plus 2. Each 2 needed 8 different switches to be flipped. Then a 9th switch was used to load them all. Add required another 9 switches. The answer 4 was if the third light from the left turned on. Eureka!
So if you had a program that was 100 bytes long, you had to go through this procedure 100 times to load that into memory.
It took a long time.
I bet it did. And what happened if you lost power or you lost your way in the middle?
You cried.
The Altair may have been frustrating, but it drove the nerds to experiment, finding real uses for the useless box, turning it from a curiosity to a computer.
Steve Dompier set up an Altair, laboriously keyed a program into it. Somebody knocked the plug out of the wall, and he had to do that all over again, but nobody knew what this was about. After all, was it just going to sit and flash its lights? No.
You put a little transistor radio next to the Altair, and he would, by manipulating the length of loops in the software, could play tunes.
The radio began playing The Fool on the Hill. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, in the tinny little tunes that you could tell were coming from the noise that the computer was generated, being picked up by the radio. Everybody rose and applauded. I proposed that he receive the Strip Phillips Screw Award for finding a use for something previously thought useless. But I think everyone was too busy applauding to even hear me.
It was a very exciting thing. It was probably the first thing the Altair actually did.
Turning the Altair into a useful tool required a programming language so users could type their programs in rather than flipping switches. What it needed was a version of some big computer language like BASIC, only modified for the PC. This was called a basic interpreter, but it didn't yet exist because the experts all thought that not even BASIC was basic enough to fit inside the tiny Altair memory. Yet again, the experts were wrong. Here comes the guy who solved the problem. 20 years after finishing the first microcomputer BASIC, Paul Allen is returning to Albuquerque for a celebration of that event, this time with his $15 million jet and 3-foot red carpet. At a time when I was killing brain cells, this guy was founding an empire. He has come to eat rubber chicken in honor of the Altair's 20th anniversary.
I'd like to introduce to you Paul Allen.
Allen co-founded Microsoft with his younger buddy from high school, Bill Gates.
One day in Boston, I was in Harvard Square, and I covered Popular Electronics with this thing that looked like what I'd been imagining. And so I grabbed it off the shelf, I looked at it, and I bought it, and I ran back to Bill's dorm, and I think he was probably playing poker that night and usually losing money at that point. One of the few times when that's been the case.
Paul showed that to me. Then, okay, here was a company that would be needing software.
And he said, okay, well, we got to call these guys up and see if this thing is for real.
We realized that things were starting to happen, and just because we'd had a vision for a long time of where this chip could go, what it could mean, that didn't mean the industry was going to wait for us while I stayed and finished my degree at Harvard.
So called up Ed, we told him we've got this BASIC, and it's just, for your machine, it's not that far from being done, and we'd like to come out and show it to you.
So we created this BASIC interpreter. Paul took the paper tape and flew out. In fact, the night before, he got some sleep while I double-checked everything to make sure that we had it all right.
But I had no idea what it was really going to be like to try to run the software. It had never been run on an actual computer before.
He was very nervous about whether this would actually work. And he got to the office, and we all gathered around, and he put his fingers on the switches, and he loaded BASIC in with paper tape into the Altair.
I was so nervous. It's not going to work. It worked.
And it came up. and it could do a few little simple things.
And it was amazing when Paul called me up and said the thing had worked the first time. And of course it was incredibly fast.
And it printed out memory size, and I think Bill said, well, it printed something. And so I said, yeah.
BASIC let the Altair be used for both fun stuff and real work. People attached terminals to the computer and began writing games, word processors, and accounting programs. Most of us didn't notice, but soon there was a thriving industry for enthusiasts. By the end of 1975, dozens of other companies were building microcomputers. Left in the hands of those early hobbyists, the PC might have never made it to the shopping mall. Reaching the wider market required a different type of vision. Enter the flower children of California, who thought the PC was, well, groovy.
From the safety of secret committees, they talk about the danger of war.
Remember that the 60s happened in the early 70s, right? So we have to remember that. And that's sort of when I came of age. So I saw a lot of this. And to me, the spark of that was that there was something beyond sort of what you see every day.
Far from the smell of the gun.
It's the same thing that causes people to want to be poets instead of bankers. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think that that same spirit can be put into products. And those products can be manufactured and given to people, and they can sense that spirit.
And a whole bunch of us had the same community spirit, and that permeated the whole Homebrew Computer Club. As soon as somebody would solve a problem, they'd come running down to the Homebrew Computer Club's next meeting, say, hey, everybody, you know that problem that all of us have been trying to figure out how to solve? Here's the solution. Isn't this wonderful? Aren't I a great guy? And it's my contention that that is a major component of why Silicon Valley was able to develop the technology as rapidly as it did, because we were all sharing. Everybody won.
Out of this creative show and tell came Apple Computer, the first mass-market PC company. The Apple founders, a couple of recent graduates from Homestead High, were regulars at homebrew meetings. Steve Wozniak was the technical wizard, and Steve Jobs was the visionary who saw microcomputers as a possible business. The first Apple computer was primitive. It was cobbled together by Woz to impress his friends at the homebrew meetings.
Everybody was interested in computers, so I started getting a crowd around me, because even though I was too shy to raise my hand and say anything in a club meeting, after the club meetings, I would put my computer that I had built, and every week it had a little bit more working on it too. But I would set it down and let people type on the keyboard. I would explain what's in it. If they come up to me and ask a question, I can answer. You know, nowadays, I would have the ability to tell them what it is, you know, and be a little bit more promotional, but back then I could only answer questions if they asked me. But I got a group that started gathering around me. And Steve Jobs saw that I had a lot of interest around me at the club, and he said, let's start selling it. And let's make this company. Came up with the name Apple, and that's how it started.
Apple was at best a funky company, started by a couple of teenage hackers who previously had been working as Alice in Wonderland characters in a local shopping mall. And they started it in this garage right here. The first Apple computer was built here. Now there are more than 10 million in use around the world. And I was there. Well, for a short time, I was an employee at Apple Computer, employee number 12, and one day I helped move materials out of this garage. At the time, Steve Jobs said the company was short of loot, so he offered to pay me in company shares, but I held out for the money. My mother still reminds me of that incident.
The Apple I was even less of a computer than the Altair. A single circuit board that came with neither a case nor a keyboard. Still, Steve Jobs managed to sell 50 Apple I's. That experience showed Jobs that there was a market for a real computer, the Apple II.
It was very clear to me that while there were a bunch of hardware hobbyists that could assemble their own computers, or at least take our board and add the transformers for the power supply and the case and the keyboard and go get a, you know, et cetera, go get the rest of the stuff. For every one of those, there were 1,000 people that couldn't do that but wanted to mess around with programming. Software hobbyists. Just like I had been when I was, 10, discovering that computer. And so my dream for the Apple II was to sell the first real packaged computer.
Steve Jobs' dream was impossible. It needed too many chips, making the product too complicated and expensive to build. But Woz didn't know it was impossible.
And then I got into a way of why have memory for your TV screen and memory for your computer, make them one. And that shrunk the chips down, and I shrunk the chips here, and why not take all these timing circuits? I looked through manuals and found a chip that did it in one chip instead of 5 and reduced that. And one thing after another happened. I wound up with so few chips. When I was done, I said, hey, in a computer that you can program to generate colored patterns on a screen, or data, or words, or play games, or anything. And it was just the computer I wanted, you know, for myself, pretty much. And but it had turned out so good. He said, I think we have a computer we could sell 1,000 a month of. How can you sell 1,000 a month, you know?
But we needed some money for tooling the case and things like that. We needed a few $100,000.
That was a lot of money for two people who had nothing in their lives to speak of, didn't have a $400 bank account.
So I went looking for some venture capital.
The scruffy 19-year-old seduced the conservative world of venture capitalists. The man Jobs persuaded to part with his cash was Arthur Rock, the inventor of venture capital and the man who had originally funded Intel. At least the Intel boys had graduated from university and owned suits.
Well, he wore sandals, and he had very long hair and beard and mustache, but very articulate. He was, I think he, at one time in his life, and it was probably when I first met him, that he ate nothing but fruit.
So as a mainline venture capitalist, this is
not the norm. This is not the norm.
With money in hand and under occasional adult supervision from an ex-Intel manager named Mike Markkula, Woz and Jobs finished the Apple II and ordered a local factory to build 1,000 machines.
2 years passed between the Altair and the Apple II, and in that time a lot of things changed. We went from a computer that was designed for hobbyists and engineers and certainly looked like a piece of test equipment to a computer that looked like a piece of consumer electronics. And we can thank Steve Jobs for that. His sense of design demanded that this structural foam case be used for the Apple II, the first case of its type on a personal computer. And not that there wasn't good engineering inside either. The Apple II was a model of efficient engineering. Here's the floppy disk drive controller, for example. There are 8 chips here where previously there would have been 35. This is an amazing bit of engineering that we can attribute to Steve Wozniak, who was certainly the Mozart of digital design. And all told, it turned the Apple II into a sensation.
The Apple II was launched at Jim Warren's West Coast Computer Fair, one of the first big microcomputer shows. The 1978 show drew thousands of attendees and dozens of exhibitors, many of them members of the Homebrew Computer Club, which spawned most of the early microcomputer companies. But there was only one company showing something that looked like a modern personal computer. Right by the entrance, in a prime spot negotiated by Steve Jobs, sat the Apple II. It mesmerized all who saw it.
My recollection is we stole the show. And a lot of dealers and distributors started lining up, and we were off and running.
How old were you?
21.
Ed Roberts invented the personal computer. It was the founders of Apple who got rich. When Apple went public in spectacular fashion in 1980, Jobs and Woz became multi-millionaires. The nerds had inherited the earth.
I was worth about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. And it wasn't that important because I never did it for the money.
It was just a little hobby company like a lot of people do, not thinking anything of it. I mean, it wasn't like we both thought it was going to go a long ways. It was like, we'll both do it for fun. But back then, there was a short window in time where one person who could sit down and do some neat, good designs could turn them into a huge thing like the Apple II.
It's astonishing that at the beginning of 1975, nobody owned a personal computer. All there was a mock-up on a magazine cover. Yet within 5 years, there had emerged here in Silicon Valley a billion-dollar industry. An unhealthy fascination with technology on the part of a few adolescents had awakened the nerd within us all. PC companies were sprouting like mushrooms to meet the enormous demand. Apple had emerged as the top fungus and had taken 50% of the market. To the boys in Cupertino, every day seemed like Christmas. But Scrooge was around the corner. There was a company that everyone associated with the word computer, a company that expected, no, demanded to dominate its market, IBM. Big Blue was on the move, and Silicon Valley would soon be feeling the reverberations.
IBM was and is an American business phenomenon. Over 60 years, Tom Watson and his son, Tom Jr., built what their workers called Big Blue into the top computer company in the world. But IBM made mainframe computers for large companies, not personal computers, at least not yet. For the PC to be taken seriously by big business, the nerds of Silicon Valley had to meet the suits of corporate America. In business, as in comedy, timing is everything, and time looked like it might be running out for an IBM PC. I'm visiting the IBMer who took up the challenge. In August 1979, as IBM's top management met to discuss their PC crisis, Bill Lowe ran a small lab in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hey, Bill, nice to see you again. Yeah, I tried to match the IBM press code. How did I do?
That's terrific. That's terrific. I'm sorry.
He knew the company was in a quandary. Wait another year, and the PC industry would be too big even for IBM to take on. Chairman Frank Carey turned to the department heads and said, "Help!"
He kind of said, well, what should we do? And I said, well, we think we know what we would like to do if we were going to proceed with our own product. And he said, no. He said, at IBM it would take 4 years and 300 people to do anything. I mean, it's just a fact of life. And I said, no, sir, we can provide you a product in a year. And he abruptly ended the meeting. He said, you're on, Lowe. Come back in 2 weeks and tell me what you need.
An IBM product in a year? Ridiculous. Down in the basement, Bill still has the plan. To save time, instead of building a computer from scratch, they would buy components off the shelf and assemble them. What in IBM speak was called open architecture. IBM never did this. 2 weeks later, Bill proposed his heresy to the chairman.
And frankly, this is it. Now, the key decisions were to go with an open architecture. Non-IBM technology, non-IBM software, non-IBM sales, and non-IBM service. And we probably spent a full half of the presentation carrying the corporate management committee into this concept, because this was a new concept for IBM at that point in time.
Was it a hard sell?
Mr. Carey bought it, and as a result of him buying it, we got through it.
With the backing of the chairman, Bill and his team then set out to break all the IBM rules and go for a record.
We'll put it in the IBM section.
Once IBM had decided to do a personal computer, and to do it in a year, they couldn't really design anything. They just had to slap it together. So that's what we'll do. You have a central processing unit, and let's see. You need a monitor or display and a keyboard. Okay, a PC, except it's not. There's something missing. Time for the Cringely crash course in elementary computing. A PC is a box full of electronic switches, a piece of hardware. It's useless until you tell it what to do. It requires a program of instructions. That's software. Every PC requires at least 2 essential bits of software in order to work at all. First, it requires a computer language. That's what you type in to give instructions to the computer, to tell it what to do. Remember, it was a computer language called BASIC that Paul Allen and Bill Gates adapted to the Altair, the first PC. The other bit of software that's required is called an operating system. That's the internal traffic cop that tells the computer itself how the keyboard is connected to the screen or how to store files on a floppy disk instead of just losing them when you turn off the PC at the end of the day. Operating systems tend to have boring, unfriendly names like Unix and CPM and MS-DOS, but though they may be boring, it's an operating system that made Bill Gates the richest man in the world. And the story of how that came about is, well, pretty interesting.
But there was a problem. IBM needed an operating system fast, and Microsoft didn't have one. What they did have was a stroke of luck, the ingredient everyone needs to be a billionaire. Unbelievably, the solution was just across town. Paul Allen, Gates' programming partner since high school, had found another operating system.
There's a local company here in Seattle called Seattle Computer Products, a guy named Tim Patterson, and he had done an operating system, very rudimentary operating system that was kind of like CPM.
And we just told IBM, look, we'll go get this operating system from the small local company, we'll take care of it, we'll fix it up, and you can still do a PC.
Tim Patterson worked for Seattle Computer Products, or SCP. They still owned the rights to QDOS, rights that Microsoft had to have.
But then we went back and said to them, look, you know, we want to buy this thing. And SCP was, like most little companies, they, you know, always needed cash, and so that was when they went into the negotiation.
And so ended up working out a deal to buy the operating system from him for whatever usage we wanted for $50,000.
Hey, let's pause there to savor an historic moment.
For whatever usage we wanted for $50,000.
It had to be the deal of the century, if not the millennium. It was certainly the deal that made Bill Gates and Paul Allen multi-billionaires and allowed Paul Allen to buy toys like these, his own NBA basketball team and arena.
Microsoft bought outright for $50,000 the operating system they needed, and they turned around and licensed it to the world for up to $50 per PC.
Think of it, 100 million personal computers running MS-DOS software funneling billions into Microsoft, a company that back then was 50 kids managed by a 25-year-old who needed to wash his hair. Nice work if you can get it, and Microsoft got it.
There are no two places further apart in the USA than southeastern Florida and Washington State, where Microsoft is based. This is Florida, Boca Raton, and this building right here is where the IBM PC was developed.
Here, the nerds from Seattle joined forces with the suits of corporate America, and in that first honeymoon year, they pulled off a fantastic achievement.
After we got a package in the mail from the people down in Florida.
As August 1981 approached, the deadline for the launch of the IBM Acorn, the PC industry held its breath.
Supposedly, maybe at this very moment, IBM is announcing a personal computer. We don't know that yet.
In companies across America, software writers like Dan Bricklin, the creator of the first spreadsheet, waited with his staff for news of the announcement. This is a moment of PC history. IBM secrecy had codenamed the PC the Floridian Project. Everyone in the PC business knew IBM would change their world forever. They also knew that if their software was on the IBM PC, they would make fortunes.
Note that the attached information is not to be disclosed prior to any public announcement. It's on the ticker. It's on the ticker? Okay, so now you can tell people.
What we're watching are the first few seconds of a $100 billion industry.
Years of thinking big, today IBM came up with something small.
Computer. Big Blue is looking for a slice of Apple's market share. IBM is...
Bits and bytes mean nothing. Try this word. Money.
Now they're going to sell $1,000 computers to millions of customers.
Piece of the pie. I have seen the future, said one analyst, and it computes.
Today, an IBM computer has reached a personal...
Nobody was ever fired for buying IBM. Now companies could put PCs with a name they trusted on desks from Wall's End to Wall Street.
What IBM said was, it's okay, corporate America, for you to now start buying and using PCs. And if it's okay for corporate America, it's got to be okay for everybody.
Your own IBM personal computer.
For all the hype, the IBM PC wasn't much better than what came before. So while the IBM name could create immense demand, it took a killer application to sustain it. The killer app for the IBM PC was yet another spreadsheet. Based on VisiCalc, but called Lotus 123, its creators were the first of many to get rich on IBM's success. Within a year, Lotus was worth $150 million. Wham, bam, thank you, IBM.
Time to rock! Time to fall! Yeah, they're working.
IBM had forecast sales of 500,000 computers by 1984. In those 3 years, they sold 2 million.
Yeah!
What did all this mean to Bill Gates, whose operating system, DOS, was at the heart of every IBM PC sold? Initially, not much because of the deal with IBM. But it did give him a vital bridgehead to other players in the PC marketplace, which meant trouble in the long run for Big Blue.
The key to the structure of our deal was that IBM had no control over our licensing to other people. And the lesson of the computer industry in mainframes was that over time people built compatible machines or clones, whatever term you want to use. And so really the primary upside on the deal we have with IBM, because they had a fixed fee, we got about $80,000, and we got some other money for some special work we did, but no royalty from them. And that's the DOS in BASIC as well. And so we were hoping a lot of other people would come along and do compatible machines.
There were other PCs that were sort of like the IBM PC, kind of like it, but IBM now had 50% market share and was defining what a PC meant. What the public wanted was IBM PCs. So to be successful, other manufacturers would have to build computers exactly like the IBM. To keep DOS competitive, Gates had been pouring resources into a new program called Windows. It was designed to provide a nice, user-friendly facade to boring old DOS. Selling it was another job for shy, retiring Steve Ballmer.
How much do you think this advanced operating environment is worth? Wait just 1 minute before you answer. Watch as Windows integrates Lotus 123 with Miami Vice. Now we can take this for...
Just as Bill Gates saw OS/2 as a threat, IBM regarded Windows as another attempt by Microsoft to hold on to the operating system business.
We created Windows in parallel. We kept saying to IBM, hey, Windows is the way to go, graphics is the way to go. And we got virtually everyone else enthused about Windows. So that was a divergence that we kept thinking we could get IBM to come around on.
It was clear that IBM had a different vision of its relationship with Microsoft than Microsoft had of its vision with IBM. Is that Microsoft's fault? You know, maybe some, but IBM's not blameless there either. So I don't view any of that as anything but just poor business on IBM's part.
Bill Gates is a very disciplined guy. He puts aside everything he wants to read and twice a year goes away for secluded reading weeks. The decisive moment in the Microsoft-IBM relationship came during just such a retreat. In front of a log fire, Bill concluded that it was no longer in Microsoft's long-term interest to blindly follow IBM. If Bill had to choose between OS/2, IBM's new operating system, and Windows, he'd choose Windows.
We said, ooh, IBM's probably not going to like this. This is going to threaten OS/2. Now, we told them about it. Right away, we told them about it. But we still did it. They didn't like it. We told them about it. We told them about it. We offered to license it to them.
We always thought the best thing to do is to try and combine IBM promoting the software with us doing the engineering. And so it was only when they broke off communication and decided to go their own way that we thought, okay, we're on our own. And that was definitely very, very scary.
And we were in a major negotiation in early 1990, right before the Windows launch. We wanted to have IBM on stage with us to launch Windows 3.0, but they wouldn't do the kind of deal that would allow us to profit. It would allow them essentially to take over Windows from us, and we walked away from the deal.
Bill's decision by the fireplace ended the 10-year IBM-Microsoft partnership and turned IBM into an also-ran in the PC business. Did David beat Goliath? The Boca Raton, Florida birthplace of the IBM PC is deserted, a casualty of diminishing market share. Today, IBM is again what it was before, a profitable, dominant mainframe computer company. For a while, IBM dominated the PC market. They legitimized the PC business, created the standards most of us now use, and introduced the PC to the corporate world. But in the end, they lost out. Maybe it was to a faster, more flexible business culture. Or maybe they just threw it away.
The Windows software system that ended the alliance between Microsoft and IBM pushed Gates past all his rivals. Microsoft had been working on the software for years, but it wasn't until 1990 that they finally came up with a version that not only worked properly, it blew their rivals away. And where did the idea for this software come from? Well, not from Microsoft, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of Windows 95.
Yes, well, welcome, Microsofties. Nice to have you all here. But now let's welcome the chairman of Microsoft. Listen to this. This is a man so successful, his chauffeur is Ross Perot, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Bill Gates.
It's August 24th, 1995, in a suburb of Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. This is the biggest, noisiest product launch in the history of the personal computer. It's Windows 95 software, and Bill Gates is the star, chairman, chief nerd, and spiritual leader of Microsoft.
But the truth is,
this is the latest step in Bill's dream to have his software running on every PC in the world.
we wanted people to be able to appreciate how Windows 95 makes computing faster, easier, and more fun. And for 7 years, it was a lonely, lonely crusade.
Reality Police.
This moves the whole PC industry up to a whole new level.
Wait a minute. All this publicity is so Bill Gates can claim that Windows 95 is the latest and perhaps most significant improvement in the PC since it was invented. He can say that his new operating system makes PCs nicer to look at and easier to use than ever before. They'll no longer be just for geeks and nerds. They'll be so easy to use that even my mother will want one. But you know what? Most of the ideas in Windows 95 were invented 20 years ago.
The 20-year journey to this software celebration hasn't been easy. It has involved huge gambles, passionate commitment, dramatic setbacks, and required the occasional crushing of rivals and allies. It's the triumph of Bill Gates' commercial vision. Success in the marketplace doesn't have to come from innovation or from being the best if you have a ruthless ability to exploit your opportunities. And the way Microsoft made the PC's graphical user interface its own is a textbook example of that ability.
Time for another cringely crash course in elementary computing. In the early days of personal computing, the machines were pretty hard to use. In part, that's because they were primitive, but it's also because computer guys tend to like things that are pretty hard to use. This is an IBM PC circa about 1983, and on it, I've written a letter to my bank manager asking him to back one of my get-rich-quick schemes. I need to file the letter now, and let me show you how I do it. There will be a test on this. Okay, the commands are copy C : /quickrich.doc space A : /begging and return. Well, not very easy to do. Here's a Windows PC about 12 years newer, and we'll do exactly the same thing. I've written a document, quickrich.doc, and I put it in the begging file, and yes, I really do mean to do it, and that's it. Pictures rather than words, making the PC easy and intuitive. This is called a graphical user interface, GUI, or GUI. Where do they come up with these names? The battle to bring GUIs to PCs and make them more user-friendly took 10 years and is a hell of a story. That's what this program is about. It's also about how Bill Gates ended up master of the GUI universe and a gazillionaire. I never said it was a fairy story.
It all began in 1971 in Palo Alto, just south of San Francisco, when Xerox, the copier company, set up the Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. Xerox management had a sinking feeling that if people started reading computer screens instead of paper, Xerox was in trouble. Unless they could dominate the paperless office of the future.
You could take computer technology into the office and make the office a much better place to work, more productive, more enjoyable, a lot more enjoyable, more interesting, more rewarding. And so we set to work on it.
Bob Taylor ran Park's computer science lab, and one of the first things he did was to buy beanbags for his researchers to sit on and brainstorm.
These are a couple of the original beanbag chairs. The role of the beanbag chair in computer science is ease of use.
Okay. It was said that of the top 100 computer researchers in the world, 58 worked at Park. Strange, as the staff never exceeded 50. But Taylor gave these nerd geniuses unlimited resources and protected them from commercial pressures.
It's very comfortable.
Now let's see you get out of it.
I feel my neural capacity already increasing. Here you go. Oh, God.
The atmosphere at Park was electric. There was total intellectual freedom. There was no conventional wisdom. Almost every idea was up for challenge and got challenged regularly.
The management said, go create the new world. We don't understand it. Here are people who have a lot of ideas and tremendous talent, young, energetic.
People came there specifically to work on 5-year programs that were their dreams.
This is the computer room in the basement of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. About 25 years ago, they built the Max time-sharing system in here, and now it's loaded with all sorts of other computers. And there's one that we're really interested in here. Let's see. Here it is. Let me turn on the lights. Okay, here we have it. This is a Xerox Alto computer built around 1973. Some people would argue that this is the first personal computer. It really isn't, because for one thing, it wasn't ever for sale, and the parts alone cost about $10,000. But it has all the elements of quite a modern personal computer, and without it, we wouldn't have the Macintosh, we wouldn't have Windows, we wouldn't have most of the things we value in computing today. And ironically, none of those things has a Xerox name on it.
What's the mail this morning?
This promotional film, made in the mid-70s to flaunt Xerox PARC research, shows just how revolutionary the Alto was. It was friendly and intuitive.
This is an experimental office system. It's in use now.
It had the first GUI using a mouse to point to information on the screen. It was linked to other PCs by a system called Ethernet, the first computer network. And what you saw on the screen was precisely what you got on your laser printer. It was way ahead of its time.
Thank you, Fred.
Everybody wanted to make a real difference. We really thought we were changing the world, and that at the end of this project, or the set of projects, personal computing would burst on the scene exactly the way we had envisioned it, and take everybody by total surprise.
But the brilliant researchers at PARC could never persuade Xerox management that their vision was accurate. Head office in New York ignored the revolutionary technologies they owned 3,000 miles away. They just didn't get it.
And none of the main body of the company was prepared to accept the answers. So there was a tremendous mismatch between the management and what the researchers were doing, in that these guys had never fantasized about what the future of the office was going to be, and when it was presented to them, they had no mechanisms for turning those ideas into real-life products. And that was really the frustrating part of it, because you were talking to people who didn't understand the vision. And yet the vision was getting created every day within the Palo Alto Research Center, and there was no one to receive that vision.
But a few miles down the road from Palo Alto was a man ready to share the vision.
The most dangerous man in Silicon Valley sits in an office in this building. People love him and hate him, often at the same time. For 10 years, by sheer force of will, he made the personal computer industry follow his direction. With this guy, we're not talking about someone driven by the profit motive and a desire for an opulent retirement at the age of 40. No, we're talking holy war. We're talking rivers of blood and fields of dead martyrs to the cause of greater computing. We're talking about a guy who sees the personal computer as his tool for changing the world. We're talking about Steve Jobs.
Hi, I'm Steve Jobs.
When I wasn't sure what the word charisma meant, I met Steve Jobs, and then I knew.
Steve Jobs is on my eternal heroes list. There's nothing he can ever do to get off it.
He wanted you to be great. And he wanted you to create something that was great. And he was going to make you do that.
He's also obnoxious. And this comes from his high standards. He has extremely high standards, and he has no patience with people who don't either share those standards or perform to them.
And I'm also one of these people that I don't really care about being right, you know. I just care about success.
Steve Jobs had co-founded Apple Computer in 1976. The first popular personal computer, the Apple II, was a hit and made Steve Jobs one of the biggest names in a brand new industry. At the height of Apple's early success, in December 1979, Jobs, then all of 24, had a privileged invitation to visit Xerox PARC.
And they showed me really three things. But I was so blinded by the first one that I didn't even really see the other two. One of the things they showed me was object-oriented programming. They showed me that, but I didn't even see that. The other one they showed me was really a networked computer system. They had over 100 Alto computers, all networked, using email, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't even see that. I was so blinded by the first thing they showed me, which was the graphical user interface. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. Now, remember, it was very flawed. What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this someday.
It was a turning point. Jobs decided this was the way forward for Apple.
He came back and, I almost said asked, but the truth is demanded that his entire programming team get a demo of the Smalltalk system. And the then head of the Science Center asked me to give the demo because Steve specifically asked for me to give the demo. And I said, no way. I had a big argument with the Xerox executives telling them that they were about to give away the kitchen sink. And I said I would only do it if I were ordered to do it, because then, of course, would be their responsibility. And that's what they did.
The mouse is a pointing device that moves a cursor around the display screen.
Adele and her colleagues showed the Apple programmers an Alto machine running a graphical user interface.
A selected window displays above other windows, much like placing a piece of paper on top of a stack on a desk.
The visitors from Apple saw a computer that was designed to be easy to use, a machine that anybody could operate and find friendly, even the French.
Choose one.
I think mostly what we got in that hour and a half was inspiration.
There were copier heads that just had no clue about a computer or what it could do. And so they just grabbed defeat from the greatest victory in the computer industry. Xerox could have owned the entire computer industry today. Could have been, a company 10 times its size. Could have been IBM. Could have been the IBM of the 90s. Could have been the Microsoft of the 90s.
For Steve Jobs, the road to Damascus passed through Palo Alto. He persuaded the Apple board to invest in technology copying what he'd seen at Xerox PARC, his instrument of change. They hired 100 engineers and started developing a new PC codenamed Lisa. But there were problems. The Lisa didn't work properly, and its price tag was heading toward $10,000, way too much for the average PC buyer. Jobs' domineering style drove everyone nuts, too, so the board ousted him from his own pet project.
I brooded for a few months. But it was not very long after that it really occurred to me that if we didn't do something here, the Apple II was running out of gas. And we needed to do something with this technology fast, or else Apple might cease to exist as the company that it was.
Jobs got his answer from Jeff Raskin, Apple employee number 31. Raskin's idea was a $600 computer, as easy to use as a toaster, codenamed Macintosh, after America's favorite Apple. Jobs liked the price, but not Raskin's design ideas, so Steve took over the Macintosh project, determined to make it a cheaper Lisa.
And so I formed a small team to do the Macintosh, and, you know, we were on a mission from God, you know, to save Apple.
After many delays, a date for the launch of the Mac was announced. The pressure of the deadline was mounting, but Steve was still a perfectionist.
No design issue was too small, and it was never too late to do it right. It was a pressure cooker. We were working until we finished. We couldn't go to sleep or anything. I was up for 3 days before in that very last push. And finally, just the stars aligned, and the last release we made at 6 a.m. that morning.
It was now all or nothing because Lisa had turned out an expensive flop. The fate of the whole company seemed to rest on the launch of the Mac. John Sculley had even authorized a $15 million advertising campaign to coincide with the Mac's public unveiling, January 24th, 1984.
I remember how nervous Steve was before the introduction of the Macintosh, and the rehearsal the night before was a total disaster. Nothing seemed to go right. Steve was upset at everybody. We wondered how in the world we were ever going to get through the introduction the following day. But when that moment came, Steve was a master showman.
There have only been 2 milestone products in our industry: the Apple II in 1977 and the IBM PC in 1981. Today, 1 year after Lisa, we are introducing the 3rd industry milestone product, Macintosh. Many of us have been working on Macintosh for over 2 years now, and it has turned out insanely great. You've just seen some pictures of Macintosh. Now I'd like to show you Macintosh in person.
The Macintosh was undoubtedly the first affordable personal computer with a genuine graphical user interface. It was also the first computer to be a monument to one man's ego. Forget the brilliant work done at Xerox PARC and the innovations borrowed from the Lisa. On the day, only one man was claiming paternity for the Mac.
So it is with considerable pride that I introduce a man who's been like a father to me, Steve Jobs.
I was standing off stage, and as he came off, he said, "This is, the proudest, happiest moment of my life," and it was all over his face. It clearly was, because he had launched a revolution.
The launch of Windows 3 in 1990 killed off Apple's hopes that the Macintosh would win the GUI wars.
Today we're introducing Microsoft Windows version 3.
The 6-year labor to produce a GUI that made IBM PCs and all the clones as easy to use as the Mac finally came up trumps. In a year, Windows 3 sold close to 30 million copies, consigning the Mac to a niche in the market.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Windows 3 development team.
Bill Gates' strategy won out. At every stage in the PC's development, he joined the leading hardware company, and by carving out a dominant market share for his product, made his software the industry standard.
The original PC did our evangelism in the way we created tools for that and pull that together. Take Windows. Did we bet our company on that? Did that come together? virtually everything we've done when we first come out with it, there's a lot of skepticism. But most of the things, we really stuck with them, and despite all that second guessing, we're able to pull them off.
The problem was the industry wasn't measured by who has the best-selling personal computer, or who has the most innovative technology. The industry was measured by who had the most open system that was adopted by the most other companies. And the Microsoft strategy ultimately turned out to be the better business strategy.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste. And what that means is, I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way, in the sense that they don't think of original ideas, and they don't bring much culture into their product. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, proportionally spaced fonts come from typesetting and beautiful books. That's where one gets the idea. If it weren't for the Mac, they would never have that in their products. And so I guess I am saddened, not by Microsoft's success. I have no problem with their success. They've earned their success, for the most part. I have a problem with the fact that they just make really third-rate products.
And we just keep making them better. We get millions of phone calls. We get to go out there and talk to customers. And there's nothing cast in concrete. If people decide there's something that we should change, we change it. It's a lot better than most industries in that sense. I think the way that applications user interfaces have advanced over the last decade, Microsoft has been at the forefront of a very high percentage of that. And I think it's great stuff.
On August 24, 1995, Gates delivered the coup de grace to his software rivals. Windows 95 combines the PC's operating system and its graphical interface into one package. With a worldwide promotional campaign costing $300 million, it looks set to become the industry standard, supplanting Microsoft's old warhorse, DOS.
Thanks all of you for an incredible job.
Cue the triumph of Bill. A software nerd is the richest man in the world.